I never loved you, Maribel. Not once in these 50 years. Staying married to you was just the easiest path forward, my husband Lowell announced, his voice cutting through the cheerful chatter of our golden anniversary celebration like a blade through silk. The banquet hall of the Pinewood Community Center fell silent. Crystal glasses froze mid-toast. My daughter Naoma's mouth dropped open. Our son Jareth stood from his chair, face reddening. The 70 guests who had gathered to celebrate our half-century together stared at Lowell, then at me, waiting for me to crumble. I could feel their pity washing over me in waves, their whispers already forming in their throats. This was supposed to be our crowning moment, the celebration of a lifetime of partnership and devotion. Instead, it had become my public execution. I stood there in my carefully chosen champagne-colored dress, the one I'd spent weeks selecting from the boutique in downtown Mercy Falls, Montana. At 73, I'd maintained my dignity and grace. My silver hair was styled in soft waves, and I'd even gotten my nails done that morning, a soft pink that matched the rose centerpieces. I'd wanted everything to be perfect. I'd wanted to look beautiful for this man who had just admitted he'd never loved me at all. The irony burned hotter than the tears I refused to let fall. Lowell stood beside me at the head table, his jaw set in that stubborn way I'd come to know so well over 5 decades. He was 75 now, his hair completely white, his shoulders slightly stooped from years of working at the lumber mill. But his eyes were still that same cold gray they'd been on our wedding day, the day I'd convinced myself I saw love in them. How foolish I'd been. How desperately blind. I'd built an entire life on a foundation of sand, and now it was crumbling beneath my feet. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table. The room spun slightly. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Not in front of our children, our grandchildren, our friends and neighbors who'd known us for decades. Lowell had always been distant, yes. Cold, certainly. But I'd told myself it was just his way. Montana men were tough, reserved, not given to flowery declarations. I'd convinced myself that his presence, his reliability, his provision for our family, that these things were love. That showing up every day for 50 years meant something. Lowell, what are you doing? Naoma whispered urgently, rushing toward us from her table. But I held up my hand, stopping her mid-stride. My daughter had always been protective of me, always sensing the cracks in our marriage that I'd worked so hard to hide. She'd inherited my strength and her father's stubbornness, a dangerous combination that had served her well in her career as a lawyer but made family gatherings tense. Now her eyes were blazing with fury directed at her father, but I needed to handle this myself. Because standing in the back of the room, half hidden behind a pillar near the entrance, was the reason for Lowell's confession. My younger sister, Calla. She'd arrived 20 minutes ago, slipping in quietly while the speeches were being made. I'd seen her immediately, you always know when your ghost walks into the room. She looked older now, her once wild auburn hair now a distinguished copper gray, her face lined with years of hard living. But she was still beautiful, still carried that dangerous energy that had captivated everyone who ever met her. Including my husband. Especially my husband. And now, after 30 years of silence, she was back. And everything I'd buried was about to claw its way to the surface. What happened between Maribel and her sister Calla? And why would Lowell choose this moment to confess? Drop a comment if you think Maribel should walk away right now, or stay to hear the truth. Don't go anywhere, this story is just getting started. Let me take you back to where this all began, back to Mercy Falls in the 1960s when Calla and I were just girls growing up in a 3-bedroom ranch house on the edge of town. I was the older sister by 4 years, responsible and studious, the one who helped Mama with the cooking and the laundry while Papa worked double shifts at the mill. I wore my hair in neat braids and pressed my church dresses with careful precision. I was proud of being reliable, of being the daughter my parents could count on. I thought that mattered. Calla was different from the moment she could walk. Wild. Untamable. She'd come home with scraped knees and torn stockings, her homework forgotten, her eyes bright with some adventure I couldn't understand. Mama would scold her, but there was always that hint of amusement in her voice, that secret pride she tried to hide. Papa called Calla his little firecracker and laughed when she challenged his rules. When I challenged rules, which I rarely did, I got lectures about responsibility and setting a good example. The unfairness of it ate at me even then, a small seed of resentment that would grow into something much darker. By the time I was 18 and Calla was 14, the dynamic was set in stone. I was graduating valedictorian, headed to the community college to study education. Calla was barely passing her classes, spending her nights sneaking out to meet boys at the Starlight Drive-In. She wore her skirts too short and her lipstick too red, and somehow everyone in Mercy Falls found it charming rather than scandalous. I remember standing at my graduation, receiving my honors medal, and watching Mama's eyes drift across the crowd to where Calla sat, laughing with her friends. Even my moment of triumph wasn't fully mine. That summer, I met Lowell Drayton at a church social. He was 20, just back from 2 years at a logging camp up north, all muscle and quiet intensity. He was the most handsome man I'd ever seen, strong jaw, thick dark hair, and those gray eyes that seemed to see right through people. When he asked me to dance, I felt like I'd won the lottery. Me. Steady, boring Maribel. He chose me. We started dating that July, and for the first time in my life, I felt special. Chosen. Beautiful. I should have known it was too good to last. Lowell would come by the house on Saturday evenings, sitting in our living room making awkward conversation with Papa while I finished getting ready. Calla would float through in her summer dresses, barefoot and golden from the sun, and I'd see his eyes follow her. Just for a second. Just a flicker of attention. I told myself I was imagining it, that my old jealousy was making me paranoid. Lowell was mine. He held my hand at the movies. He kissed me goodnight on the porch. He talked about the future we'd build together. Those things meant something. They had to mean something. By October, Lowell had proposed. It was practical rather than romantic. We were standing by his truck after a Sunday service, and he said, "Maribel, you'd make a good wife. I think we should get married in the spring." Not exactly the declaration of passionate love I'd dreamed of, but I was 22 now, and in Mercy Falls, that was getting old for a single woman. My friends were already married with babies. Mama had started making pointed comments about not wanting to wait forever for grandchildren. So I said yes, and I wore his grandmother's simple gold ring, and I told myself this was what real love looked like, steady, sensible, built to last. The wedding was planned for May. I threw myself into preparations with the same fierce dedication I brought to everything, choosing flowers, addressing invitations, sewing my own dress from white lace I'd ordered from a catalog. I was going to be the perfect bride, and then the perfect wife, and Lowell would fall completely in love with me. That was how it worked, wasn't it? You showed someone how devoted you were, and they loved you back. I believed that right up until the day I found Lowell and Calla in the barn behind our house, 3 weeks before my wedding. She was 16. He was 22. And they were wrapped around each other like they were drowning and each other was air. The sound I made when I saw them, it wasn't quite a scream, wasn't quite a sob. It was something breaking. Something that would never quite heal right, no matter how many years passed. Can you imagine discovering that? Comment below if you would have called off the wedding or if you think Maribel did the right thing by staying. And make sure you're subscribed for what Maribel did that changed everything. I ran from that barn like the devil himself was chasing me. My vision blurred with tears, my breath coming in gasps that tore at my chest. I made it to the creek that ran along the back of our property and collapsed on the bank, my carefully pressed dress soaking in the mud, my whole body shaking with sobs. Behind me, I could hear them calling my name, first Calla, her voice high and panicked, then Lowell, low and urgent. But I couldn't face them. I couldn't look at either of them without seeing their bodies pressed together, without hearing Calla's breathless laughter, without remembering the way Lowell had looked at her like she was the only person in the world. They found me 20 minutes later, both of them pale and guilty. Lowell crouched in front of me, his hands raised like he was approaching a wounded animal. "Maribel, please. Let me explain." But what was there to explain? I'd seen everything I needed to see. Calla stood behind him, her arms wrapped around herself, mascara streaking down her face. For once, my wild sister looked small and frightened. Good. I wanted her to hurt the way I was hurting. I wanted both of them to feel the knife that had just gone through my heart. "How long?" I finally managed to ask, my voice hoarse from crying. Lowell's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter. It's over. It was a mistake." But I looked at Calla, and I saw the truth written all over her face. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This had been going on for months, maybe since the beginning. Maybe Lowell had never been mine at all. Maybe when he looked at me, he was always seeing her, wishing I was her, settling for the older, duller, more convenient sister. The realization made me want to vomit. "I'm 16, Calla whispered, and I wasn't sure if she was defending herself or condemning Lowell. Maybe both. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Maribel. I didn't mean to fall in love with him." Love. She called it love. As if that made it better. As if loving him gave her the right to betray me, to take the one good thing I'd ever had for myself. I stood up, mud dripping from my dress, and I looked at both of them with a coldness I didn't know I possessed. "Get away from me. Both of you." I walked back to the house alone, climbed the stairs to my bedroom, and locked the door. Mama knocked several times, her voice worried, but I couldn't tell her. How could I explain that my fiancé and my baby sister had been carrying on behind my back? That my wedding in 3 weeks was a farce? That everything I believed about my life was a lie? I lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling until the sun went down, until the house went quiet, until I heard Papa's snores from down the hall. Then I made a decision that would shape the next 50 years of my life. I decided to go through with the wedding anyway. I know how that sounds. Crazy. Desperate. Pathetic. But you have to understand what it was like to be a woman in Mercy Falls in 1968. I'd already sent out the invitations. The church was booked. My dress was finished. Everyone in town was talking about the wedding. If I called it off now, everyone would ask why. And what would I say? That my sister seduced my fiancé? That would destroy Calla. She was still just 16, still in high school. People would call her terrible names. She might have to leave town. And despite everything, despite the betrayal that was still raw and bleeding, she was my sister. I'd spent my whole life protecting her, covering for her, cleaning up her messes. This would be just one more sacrifice on an altar I'd been building since I was 4 years old. So I unlocked my door the next morning, went downstairs, and told Mama I'd slipped and fallen in the mud. I hung my dress up to dry. I called Lowell and told him we were still getting married, but he was never to touch Calla again. I didn't speak to my sister for 2 weeks, but eventually, I forgave her, or pretended to, anyway. And on May 18, 1968, I walked down the aisle of Mercy Falls Methodist Church in my white lace dress and married a man who loved someone else. I told myself I could make him love me. I told myself that time and devotion and children would be enough. I told myself I'd made the right choice. And for 50 years, I lived with the consequences of that lie. Would you have married him anyway? Or would you have walked away and started over? Let me know in the comments. And hit that like button if you're feeling Maribel's pain right now. Our wedding night was spent at the Pinewood Lodge, a small resort about an hour outside Mercy Falls. Mama and Papa had paid for 2 nights as a wedding gift, and I'd packed my carefully chosen trousseau, silk nightgowns I'd embroidered myself, lavender sachets for the suitcase, a new bottle of Chanel No. 5 that had cost me a month's wages from my teaching job. I'd imagined this night 1,000 times, the tenderness and passion that would finally make us truly married, truly committed to each other. Instead, Lowell sat on the edge of the bed, still in his wedding suit, and put his head in his hands. I can't do this, he said quietly. Not to me, exactly. More to the universe, to God, to whatever force had brought us to this moment. I stood by the window in my silk robe, my hair brushed out long and loose the way I thought he'd like, feeling ridiculous and exposed. Can't do what? I asked, though I already knew. I'd known from the moment he'd said his vows, his voice flat and mechanical, his eyes focused somewhere over my shoulder. I'd known when he'd barely touched me during our first dance. I'd known when he'd suggested we skip the reception early, his eagerness stemming not from desire but from duty. Be married. Be a husband. I don't love you, Maribel. I tried to convince myself I could learn to, but I can't. My heart belongs to someone else. He finally looked at me then, and I saw genuine anguish in his gray eyes. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He was just being honest, and somehow that made it worse. Calla, I said flatly. It wasn't a question. He nodded, and the last piece of my girlish hope crumbled into dust. She's 16 years old, Lowell. What you feel for her is wrong. It's illegal. It can't happen. I know, he said miserably. That's why I married you. Because it's the right thing to do. Because she needs to forget about me and have a normal life. Because you and I make sense on paper, same age, same town, same church. Everyone says we're a perfect match. He laughed bitterly. Perfect. Except I close my eyes and see her face. I hear her laugh in every room. I married you to stop loving her, Maribel. But I don't think it's going to work. The cruelty of that admission took my breath away. He'd married me as a cure for loving my sister. I wasn't his choice. I was his penance. I could have left right then. I could have walked out of that lodge, had the marriage annulled, started over somewhere new. But where would I go? Back to my parents' house in shame? To a teaching job in some other town where everyone would whisper about the girl whose marriage didn't even last one night? In 1968, divorce was scandal. Annulment was scandal. A woman alone was pitted at best, suspected at worst. And underneath all the practical concerns was something darker, a stubborn determination that I would not let Calla win. If I left Lowell, she'd have him eventually. When she turned 18, or 21, or whenever people stopped caring about the age difference. I'd lose my husband and my sister. No. I would stay. I would fight for this marriage. I would make him love me if it killed me. Then we'll work on it, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Love can grow over time. My mama says that's how her marriage started, practical and respectful, and now she and Papa are happy enough. We'll build a life together. We'll have children. You'll see. This will get better. Lowell looked at me with something like pity, but he nodded. What choice did he have? We'd made our vows in front of God and everyone we knew. We were bound now, for better or worse. Though standing in that lodge room, watching my husband mourn his love for my sister on our wedding night, I knew it was going to be mostly worse. We didn't make love that night. Or the next night. It would be 3 months before Lowell finally touched me, and then only because I'd cried and begged and told him I wanted a baby. Even then, it was mechanical and joyless, him fulfilling his husbandly duty while clearly wishing he was anywhere else. But it worked. I got pregnant with Naoma in November, and suddenly Lowell seemed more present, more invested. He'd put his hand on my growing belly and smile, and I'd tell myself this was the beginning of real love. That our child would bind us together in ways our vows couldn't. Calla, meanwhile, had grown wild after the wedding. She dropped out of school at 17, started staying out all night, came home drunk or high or not at all. Mama cried. Papa raged. But Calla was unreachable, drowning in her own pain and guilt and rebellion. She got a job waitressing at a truck stop diner, moved into a motel on the edge of town, and barely spoke to the family. The few times she came around, she wouldn't look at me or Lowell. She'd aged 10 years in 10 months, all the light gone from her eyes. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt hollow. I'd won the battle and lost the war. I had Lowell's name and his child growing inside me. But Calla had his heart. And that was the prize that really mattered. That was the prize I'd spend the next 50 years trying to claim for myself, never quite succeeding, never quite brave enough to walk away. This is heartbreaking on so many levels. Comment Team Maribel if you think she deserved better than this. And don't you dare leave now, you need to see what Calla does next. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. The next 2 decades passed in a blur of diapers and school plays and mortgage payments. Naoma was born in 1969, a beautiful baby girl with Lowell's gray eyes and my dark hair. Jareth followed 3 years later, all blonde curls and his father's stubborn jaw. I threw myself into motherhood with the same fierce determination I'd brought to everything else in my life. I was going to be the perfect mother, create the perfect home, and somehow, through sheer force of will, build the perfect marriage. If I just tried hard enough, loved hard enough, sacrificed enough, surely Lowell would finally see me. Finally choose me. Finally love me back. Lowell worked long hours at the mill, came home tired and silent, ate the dinners I'd carefully prepared, helped the kids with their homework in his gruff way, and then retreated to the garage or the television. We existed in parallel rather than together, 2 people sharing a house and a last name but not much else. Our friends thought we were stable and solid, Lowell the strong, silent provider, Maribel the dedicated wife and mother. Only I knew about the distance between us, the careful way we navigated around each other, the bed we shared without ever really touching except for the brief, dutiful encounters that gave us our children. Calla disappeared entirely from our lives around 1972. One day she just left Mercy Falls without a word to anyone. Mama heard through the grapevine that she'd gone to California, then later to Nevada, drifting from city to city, job to job, man to man. Occasionally a postcard would arrive, brief, impersonal updates with no return address. She never called. She never came home for holidays. It was like she died, except we couldn't properly grieve because she was out there somewhere, alive and deliberately staying away. Mama aged 10 years and 5, the worry and heartbreak etching deep lines around her eyes and mouth. Papa stopped talking about Calla altogether, as if she'd never existed. I told myself Calla's absence made things easier. Without her ghost haunting our marriage, maybe Lowell and I could finally build something real. And in some ways, we did. He was a good father, present for baseball games and fishing trips, patient with Jareth's endless questions, protective of Naoma when she started dating. He fixed things around the house without being asked, remembered my birthday, showed up for church every Sunday. We had a rhythm, a partnership. Friends would tell me how lucky I was to have such a steady, reliable husband. If I felt lonely lying next to him at night, well, wasn't that just the reality of long marriage? Wasn't everyone a little lonely in their own way? The kids grew up not knowing about the fractures in their parents' marriage. To them, we were normal. Maybe a little quiet, maybe not as affectionate as some of their friends' parents, but stable and predictable in there. Naoma went to college in Bozeman, got her law degree, married a good man named Marcus. Jareth took over his grandfather's hardware store, married his high school sweetheart Trina, gave us 4 beautiful grandchildren. Our life looked picture perfect from the outside: successful kids, growing family, paid off mortgage, retirement nest egg. I'd achieved everything I'd set out to achieve. Except for the one thing that mattered most. Lowell's love. That remained just out of reach, a mirage I'd been chasing for decades. Then, in 1992, on our 25th wedding anniversary, something shifted. We were at dinner at the one nice restaurant in Mercy Falls, and I'd had 3 glasses of wine, more than I usually drink. "Do you ever think about her?" I asked suddenly, surprising both of us. Lowell knew immediately who I meant. He set down his fork carefully. "Yes," he said simply. No apology. No explanation. Just that brutal honesty that cut deeper than any lie could have. "Every day," he added, and I watched my carefully constructed illusions shatter all over again. "I've given you 25 years, I said, my voice shaking. "I've been a good wife. A good mother. I've never complained. I've never demanded more than you could give. And it's still not enough. It's never going to be enough, is it?" Lowell looked at me with something like sympathy, and I hated him for it. I didn't want his pity. I wanted his love. "You're right, Maribel. You've been a wonderful wife. You deserve better than me. But I can't be someone I'm not. I can't make myself feel what I don't feel." He reached across the table and took my hand, maybe the most affectionate gesture he'd made in years. "I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry. But I'm too old and too tired to pretend anymore." That was the night I realized I'd wasted my entire adult life on a man who would never love me. 25 years of cooking his favorite meals and ironing his shirts and sharing his bed and raising his children, and I was no closer to winning his heart than I'd been on our wedding night. The unfairness of it crushed me. But what was I supposed to do? Divorce him at 50 and start over? I had no career of my own. I'd quit teaching when Naoma was born and never went back. I had no identity outside of being Lowell's wife. So I squeezed his hand back, finished my wine, and went home to the house we paid off together. And I kept pretending for another 25 years. Because some prisons are so comfortable, so familiar, that leaving them feels more terrifying than staying. Even when the bars are made of your own choices, your own compromises, your own cowardice. 25 years of marriage and he still thought about Kala every single day? Drop a broken heart in the comments if your heart is breaking for Maribel right now. It was a Tuesday morning in March, 3 months before our 50th anniversary, when my phone rang with a California area code. I almost didn't answer. I'd learned to ignore the robocalls and scammers that constantly pestered us. But something made me pick up. "Is this Maribel Drayton?" a woman's voice asked, and there was something familiar in the cadence, even after 30 years. My heart stopped. "Kala?" I breathed. The silence on the other end confirmed it before she spoke. "Yeah. It's me. I need to talk to you, Maribel. About something important." We hadn't spoken in 3 decades. No calls on holidays, no acknowledgement of the births of my grandchildren, no condolences when Mama died in 2010 or Papa in 2015. She'd become a ghost, a name we didn't speak aloud, a wound we'd all learned to work around. And now here she was, her voice older and rougher but unmistakably hers, crashing back into my carefully ordered life like a wrecking ball. "Why now?" I asked, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles went white. "After all this time, why are you calling me now?" "I'm sick," Kala said bluntly. "Stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, probably less. And before I die, I need to make some things right. Starting with you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Cancer. Dying. My sister was dying. Despite everything, the betrayal, the decades of silence, the pain she'd caused, she was still my sister. The little girl who'd followed me around as a toddler, who'd crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd held my hand on the first day of kindergarten. "Kala, I'm so sorry," I whispered, and I meant it. Whatever else lay between us, I didn't want her to die. "I want to come to Montana," she continued. "I want to see you. And I want to see Lowell. I know you're having your 50th anniversary soon." Naoma sent me an invitation. That stopped me cold. Naoma did what? My daughter had tracked down her estranged aunt and invited her to our anniversary without telling me? "She's been in touch with me for about 5 years now," Kala admitted. "I made her promise not to tell you. I wasn't ready to face you. But now, with the cancer and the time I have left, I need to come home, Maribel. I need to tell you both some things that should have been said 50 years ago." Panic flooded through me. Kala, here in Mercy Falls. Kala at our anniversary party. Kala and Lowell in the same room for the first time in half a century. Everything I'd buried, everything I'd pretended didn't exist, everything I'd built my life around ignoring, it was all about to come roaring back to the surface. "No," I said firmly. "You can come visit if you need to. But not at the anniversary. That's our celebration. You don't belong there." The words came out harsher than I intended, but I meant them. She'd taken enough from me. She wasn't taking this too. "I'm coming to the anniversary whether you want me there or not," Kala said, and there was the steel I remembered from our childhood, the stubborn determination that had always gotten her what she wanted. "Naoma invited me. I'm her aunt. I have a right to be there. Besides, Maribel, don't you think it's time we all stopped pretending? Don't you think 50 years of lies is long enough?" She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost pleading. "I'm dying. And before I go, I need to tell the truth. All of it. Even the parts you don't know. Especially those parts. Parts one didn't know? What could be left to discover after all these years?" "What are you talking about?" I demanded. But Kala had already hung up. I stood in my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, the dial tone buzzing like a swarm of angry bees, and I felt the foundation of my life beginning to crack. Everything I'd carefully constructed, the stable marriage, the respectable life, the narrative I'd told myself about my choices, was about to be tested. And I had a terrible feeling that when the truth finally came out, nothing would ever be the same again. Wait, what doesn't Maribel know? What secrets has Kala been keeping all these years? Comment your theories below. And smash that subscribe button. The morning of our 50th anniversary, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. I'd chosen the champagne-colored dress carefully, had my hair done at the salon, even splurged on professional makeup. At 73, I still had good bone structure, clear hazel eyes, a figure I'd maintained through careful eating and daily walks. I looked dignified. Elegant. Like a woman who'd lived a good life and had nothing to regret. The mirror was a liar. Underneath the carefully applied foundation, I was terrified. Because in a few hours, Kala would walk into that community center, and whatever I'd built over 50 years would come crashing down. Lowell emerged from the bathroom in his suit, charcoal gray, the one Jareth had helped him pick out for the occasion. He looked handsome, distinguished, every inch the respected retired mill supervisor who'd provided for his family for half a century. He caught my eye in the mirror and actually smiled. "You look beautiful, Maribel," he said, and for a moment, I let myself pretend that he meant it the way a husband should. That this was a real marriage we were celebrating, not a 50-year performance. Then reality crashed back. In a few hours, he'd see Kala again. And I'd see his face when he looked at her, and I'd know, finally, definitively, that I'd never stood a chance. The Pinewood Community Center was decorated beautifully. Naoma and Jareth had spent weeks planning every detail: white roses and gold ribbons, a slideshow of photos from our 50 years together, a cake that must have cost a fortune. Our friends and family started arriving at 3 o'clock, filling the hall with laughter and congratulations. Everyone wanted to shake our hands, tell us how inspiring we were, how rare 50 years of marriage was these days. I smiled and thanked them and felt like a fraud. They were celebrating a lie. A beautiful, well-maintained, meticulously decorated lie. But still a lie. By 4 o'clock, 70 people had gathered. Jareth gave a speech about what wonderful parents we'd been, how we'd taught him the meaning of commitment and perseverance. Naoma spoke about the stability we'd provided, the home that had always been there for her. The grandchildren presented us with a video they'd made, interviewing us separately about our marriage. I watched myself on screen, talking about partnership and compromise and growing together over the years. I sounded so wise, so content. I'd become an excellent actress over the decades. Maybe that was my real talent, not teaching or mothering or keeping a home. Just pretending. Just surviving. Then I saw her. Kala slipped through the entrance at the back of the hall, and the years fell away like they'd never existed. She was thinner now, almost gaunt, the cancer already ravaging her body despite the carefully applied makeup and the elegant navy dress she wore. But her hair was still that distinctive auburn gray, her eyes still that startling green. She moved through the crowd slowly, and I watched people's faces as they recognized her: shock, curiosity, uncomfortable whispers. The prodigal sister, returned from the dead. She was making her way toward the head table where Lowell and I sat. Making her way toward us. Toward him. Lowell hadn't seen her yet. He was talking to his old foreman from the mill, his back to the entrance. But I knew the moment he sensed something was different. He stopped mid-sentence, his body going still the way animals do when they catch the scent of something dangerous or desired. He turned slowly, and his eyes found Kala across the room. And the look on his face, God, the look on his face. It was like watching a dead man come back to life. Like watching ice melt in spring. Like watching the sun rise after 50 years of darkness. He looked at her the way I'd spent half a century praying he'd look at me. And I finally understood, with crystalline certainty, that I'd been living a delusion. Love like that doesn't fade. It doesn't transfer. It doesn't compromise. You either have it or you don't. And I never did. Kala reached our table, and up close, I could see how sick she really was. The hollows under her cheekbones, the yellow tinge to her skin, the way she moved carefully like everything hurt. She looked at me first, her green eyes filled with something complicated: regret, defiance, sorrow, determination. "Hello, Maribel," she said softly. Then she turned to Lowell, and I watched 50 years of restraint crumble. "Hello, Lowell." His hand trembled as he reached for his water glass. "Kala," he breathed, and there was more emotion in that one word than I'd heard in our entire marriage. "You came." She nodded. "I had to." Before it's too late. Before I can't anymore. The hall had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now, sensing the electricity in the air, the decades of history crackling between the three of us. That's when Lowell stood up, took the microphone from the podium, and said the words that would finally shatter my carefully constructed world. I need to tell you all something. Something I should have said 50 years ago. He looked directly at me, and I saw something like apology in his gray eyes. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The truth had been building pressure for 5 decades, and now it was erupting like a geyser. I never loved you, Maribel. Not once in these 50 years. Staying married to you was just the easiest path forward. The gasps from our guests sounded like thunder. Naoma stood up, her face white with shock and fury. But I just sat there, frozen, because finally, someone had said it out loud. The truth we'd all been dancing around for half a century. And now there was no taking it back. He actually said it out loud. In front of everyone. Comment no he didn't if you can't believe what just happened. The silence that followed Lowell's confession was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, the rustle of fabric as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, someone stifled sob from across the room. Naoma was moving toward us, her lawyer instincts kicking in, ready to protect me or salvage the situation or both. But I held up my hand, stopping her just like I'd done at the beginning of this disaster. Because something was happening inside me. Something that had been building for 50 years. The pressure of all those swallowed words, all those hidden truths, all that silent suffering, it was finally demanding release. I stood up slowly, my champagne dress catching the light, and I took the microphone from Lowell's trembling hands. He looked surprised, maybe even a little afraid. Good. He should be afraid. For 50 years, I'd been the dutiful wife, the one who kept secrets, the one who protected everyone else's feelings at the expense of my own. But Calla was dying. Lowell had just humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. And I was 73 years old. If not now, when? If not here, where? I was done protecting them. I was done protecting anyone. It was time for the whole truth. Not just Lowell's version. Mine. You're right, Lowell, I said, my voice surprisingly steady as it echoed through the sound system. You never loved me. I knew that on our wedding night when you sat on the edge of the bed and cried over losing my sister. I knew it every time you closed your eyes when we made love, yes, everyone, when we made love, because I could tell you were imagining someone else. I knew it every single day of our 50-year marriage. So thank you for finally having the courage to say it out loud. But since we're being honest now, let me tell you all the rest of the story. The parts that Lowell conveniently left out. I turned to face Calla, who'd gone pale. 3 weeks before our wedding, I found you and Lowell in the barn behind our parents' house. You were 16 years old. He was 22. You were engaged in activities that were not only morally wrong but legally criminal. I could have called off the wedding. I could have told Mama and Papa. I could have had Lowell arrested. But I didn't. You know why? My voice was rising now, years of rage finally finding its outlet. Because despite everything, you were my baby sister. And I loved you. And I couldn't bear to see you destroyed. So I married him anyway. I married a man who loved you, to protect you. The gasps were louder now. I saw Calla's eyes fill with tears, saw Lowell sink back into his chair. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I spent 50 years trying to make him love me. 50 years cooking his favorite meals and ironing his shirts and raising his children and sharing his bed and pretending we were happy. 50 years of living with a ghost between us, the ghost of you, Calla. The sister who ran away rather than face what she'd done. The sister who sent postcards but never came home. The sister who let me shoulder the burden of her choices while she lived her free life in California. I was shaking now, but I kept going. And you know the worst part? The truly pathetic part? I told myself it was noble. I told myself I was being mature and forgiving and strong. But I was just a coward. Too afraid to leave. Too desperate to be chosen. Too stupid to realize that you can't make someone love you, no matter how hard you try. I looked out at our guests, friends we'd known for decades, family who'd celebrated every milestone with us, people who thought they knew us. So yes, Lowell never loved me. But I never respected myself either. I stayed in a loveless marriage for 50 years because I was too scared to start over. Because I cared more about what everyone thought than about my own happiness. Because I believed the lie that a woman without a husband is somehow less than. And I'm standing here at 73 years old, at the end of my life, realizing I wasted it. I wasted every precious day of it trying to win love from a man who was incapable of giving it to me. That's the real tragedy here. Not that Lowell doesn't love me. That I never loved myself enough to walk away. The microphone slipped from my hand, feedback screeching through the speakers. The room was completely silent. Naoma was crying. Jareth looked like he'd been punched. Our grandchildren sat frozen, trying to process what they just heard about their grandparents' perfect marriage. And Calla was standing now, tears streaming down her gaunt face, her hand pressed to her mouth. Maribel, she whispered, but I couldn't hear any more apologies. Couldn't bear any more explanations. I'd said what I needed to say. I'd finally, after 50 years, told my truth. And it was terrifying and liberating and devastating all at once. I walked away from the head table, away from Lowell and Calla and the ruins of our golden anniversary celebration. I walked through the silent crowd, my head held high despite the tears running down my face. I walked out of the Pinewood Community Center into the cool Montana evening, and for the first time in 50 years, I had absolutely no idea what came next. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I was done pretending. Done protecting. Done sacrificing. Whatever time I had left, I was going to spend it living for myself. Even if I had to figure out who that self was after spending a lifetime being defined by other people's needs and other people's choices and other people's love stories that never included me. I was 73 years old, and I was finally free. Maribel just dropped the mic on 50 years of lies. Comment queen if you're standing up and cheering right now. But wait, the story isn't over. I made it to my car before Calla caught up with me. I was fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't get them in the lock, when I heard her voice behind me. Maribel, please. Please wait. There's something I have to tell you. Something I should have told you 50 years ago. I didn't turn around. I couldn't look at her without seeing that 16-year-old girl wrapped around my fiancé, without feeling the knife of betrayal twisting in my chest all over again. I don't want to hear it, Calla. Whatever excuse you have, whatever explanation, I don't care anymore. I'm done. I was pregnant, she said, and the words hit me like a physical blow. I turned slowly, sure I'd misheard. What? Calla was leaning against the car next to mine, her face pale in the parking lot lights, her breathing labored. That day you found us in the barn, I was pregnant with Lowell's baby. 3 months along. That's why I was so desperate, why I couldn't let him go. I was 16 and pregnant and terrified, and he was going to marry you, and I didn't know what to do. The world tilted. Pregnant. My sister had been pregnant with my fiancé's baby. while I was addressing wedding invitations and choosing flowers and planning our future. What happened? I heard myself ask. I had an abortion, Calla said, the words coming out flat and dead. 2 weeks after you found us. Lowell gave me the money. Mama and Papa never knew. I went to a clinic in Billings, and I came home empty and broken, and then I watched you marry him anyway. I watched you walk down that aisle in your white dress, and I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell everyone. But I was so ashamed. So guilty. I'd ruined everything, my life, your life, Lowell's life, the baby's life. Everything I touched turned to poison. She was crying now, huge gasping sobs that shook her frail body. So I left. I ran away because I couldn't stand to see what I'd destroyed. And I never came back because I was too much of a coward to face you. I felt like I was drowning. All these years, I thought I knew the whole story. I thought the betrayal was just an affair, just teenage lust and stupidity. But there'd been a baby. A pregnancy. An abortion. Secrets layered on secrets, lies wrapped in lies. Did Lowell know? I demanded. Did he know you were pregnant when he married me? Calla shook her head. Not until after the abortion. I told him afterward. He was devastated. He wanted to leave you, wanted to run away with me. But I told him no. I told him to stay, to honor his vows, to give you the life you deserved. Because of all of us, you were the only one who'd done nothing wrong. You were the innocent one. Don't, I said sharply. Don't you dare try to make yourself the hero of this story. You didn't tell him to stay with me out of love or nobility. You did it out of guilt. And then you left, and you let me spend 50 years married to a man who was grieving both you and the child you'd lost together. Do you have any idea how that feels? To be married to someone who's mourning a whole life that doesn't include you? Every silence, every distant look, every moment he pulled away, he wasn't just wishing for you. He was wishing for the family you could have had. The baby. The life he chose to give up. I laughed bitterly. I wasn't just competing with my sister. I was competing with a ghost baby that never got to exist. Calla slid down to sit on the pavement, her strength finally giving out. The abortion damaged me, she said quietly. It wasn't done properly. I ended up with an infection that left me unable to have children. So I spent the next 50 years wandering from city to city, man to man, trying to fill the emptiness. Trying to outrun the guilt. I drank too much, used too many drugs, made so many terrible choices. And now I'm dying, and I'll never have children, never have grandchildren, never have any of the things you have. I destroyed my own life, Maribel. You didn't do this to me. I did it to myself. She looked up at me, her green eyes pleading. I came back to tell you that. To tell you that you won. You got the life, the family, the respectability. I got nothing. So please, please forgive me. I'm dying, and I can't die carrying this guilt. But I couldn't give her that absolution. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You want me to forgive you so you can have peace? I asked. What about my peace? What about the 50 years I lost trying to make a broken marriage work? You're dying, Calla. But I've been dying for 50 years. Slowly. Quietly. A little more each day. You think you got nothing? At least you were free. At least you lived on your own terms, made your own choices, followed your own desires. I lived for everyone else. For Lowell. For the kids. For respectability. For the fantasy that if I just tried hard enough, everything would be okay. You escaped. I was the one who stayed in prison. I turned back to my car, finally getting the key in the lock. I don't forgive you. And I don't forgive myself for staying. Maybe someday I will. But not tonight. I drove away, leaving Calla sitting in that parking lot, leaving the ruins of our anniversary party behind, leaving Lowell to deal with the consequences of his confession. I drove through the empty streets of Mercy Falls, past the houses I'd known my whole life, past the church where I'd married Lowell, past the school where I'd once taught before I gave up my career for marriage. I drove until I reached the edge of town, where the road stretched out into the Montana darkness, leading to places I'd never been, lives I'd never lived, possibilities I'd abandoned 50 years ago. And I realized something profound and terrible and freeing: it wasn't too late. I was 73, but I was healthy and had my retirement savings and could still choose. Could still leave. Could still start over, even now, even this late. The question was, did I have the courage? After 50 years of choosing safety over happiness, did I finally have the courage to choose myself? A secret baby? An abortion? Infertility? This story just went to a whole other level. Comment OMG if you're shook right now. This the finale where Maribel makes her final choice. Will she stay or will she go? You have to see how this ends. I'm 74 now, living my own life for the first time. I still see my children and grandchildren regularly. I still live with the consequences of choices I made 50 years ago. But I also live with new choices I'm making now, to travel, to create, to take risks, to say no when I mean no and yes when I mean yes. My story didn't have the ending I once wanted. I didn't get the fairy tale, the true love, the happy marriage. But maybe that's okay. Maybe some of us are meant to have different kinds of stories, stories about finding ourselves late in life, about refusing to accept scraps when we deserve the whole meal, about discovering that it's never too late to start honoring your own heart. At our 50th anniversary, my husband said he never loved me. And my reply, walking away, building a new life, choosing myself, left everyone speechless. Including me. But sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is simply decide she's worth more than the leftovers of someone else's love story. And then actually believe it. That's the real happy ending. Not the one I got. The one I'm creating for myself, one brave day at a time. This is how you take back your life at 73. If Maribel's story moved you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what you would have done in her shoes. And subscribe because I have more powerful stories like this coming your way. Remember, it's never too late to choose yourself. Never. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that message today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.